My grandfather was born in London. My great-grandfather came over in 1870 from East Europe. You know, the borders moved, so that there were people who today would have been born in Poland, in those days were born in Germany, because it was the German part. Germans ran that bit of Russia, which is now Poland. So anyway, they were German citizens. And my great-grandfather came over 1870, lived in Brick Lane, opened an import business for flour and herring, cucumbers, Jewish soul food. So that after 1880, when there was the mass migration into London, my grandfather was well set up to supply the masses with the food they used to eat in Poland. That was my great-grandfather. My grandfather took over the business. My grandfather was a haredim who fought with the chief rabbi, and there's a whole saga of public demonstrations, law, prosecution by the chief rabbi and of the chief rabbi, and I don't know if you're interested in that kind of thing. This was the Jews of London were really very similar in many ways to the Jews of Jerusalem, with the haredim on one side, the reformers on the other side. Then this is my mother's family. Frost. Oh, then my mother married my father, who was born in Liverpool, and we moved north.
What was the fight over, the religious, what was it over exactly?
Kashrut. There was a group of people who did not believe in the standards of religion of the chief rabbi. They said it's kashrut. I mean, if you're interested, there are books about this. It is really saga, and it's worth a film in itself. They set up a separate organization called the Machzikei Hadas, if it means anything. The Machzikei Hadas then had its own shochtim, and they did their own shechita, and they walked around London writing on the window of any butcher who said, under the supervision of the chief rabbi, they wrote treif across, in great letters across his window, criticized the chief rabbi loudly in their newspaper, to the extent that the chief rabbi, Rabbi Adler then, was forced to prosecute them in the courts. And that trial is a very interesting incident, because they had to translate everything to Yiddish, because half the people who gave evidence didn't speak English, to the judge's extreme annoyance. The Machzikei Hadas grew because they were Orthodox. There was a large contingent of Orthodox Jews in Eastern Europe, and they bought from the Huguenots the church in what's the street? It's the end.
Street.
No. The Huguenot church.
Brick Lane.
Yeah, the Huguenot.
Brick Lane. It's just off Brick Lane. And that was the Machzikei Hadas shul until the Muslims came, the Bangladeshis. Now there's another subject. You could do the history of that synagogue and how the people, residents around it changed over the centuries. We went back to Brick Lane, which we remembered from our youth as a wholly Jewish area, with Jewish butchers and cake shops and so forth, to find that there were the best the best curry restaurants in London are now there. The East End was a ghetto, and people were trying to get out of it. The poor people had to stay, the rich had to go. We followed the Huguenots who lived in the East End, and as they got richer and made money, they moved to North and Northwest London. The Jews moved out as soon as they could, leaving very few. The next wave of immigration, the poor, moved into the East End. There's a whole history to this. In the days of the Huguenots, in the 14th, 15th century, you could not, if you were a foreigner, you could not own property within the walls of London. So you had to be outside the walls. The Huguenots, I say, they had to be outside the walls. You could move into the city during the day, but you couldn't sleep in the city. So you had to live outside. So the East End of London, Whitechapel, Spitalfield, and so forth, grew up as a poor community out of which people moved as soon as they could. And the Jews followed the pattern. We're not unique. Stanley Goldwater, remember, came to see a friend from London. And we took him on a tour of the Negev, 1960. And he said, I'd always heard that Israelis were 7 foot tall. He says, it's true. It's true. That Israel, when you saw the youth, it was a different nation. It was not poor Jews in the East End living in a foreign country and trying to make a living. It was somebody who stood up straight in a land that belonged to them. It's a completely different psychology. And that's how it's changed. And then, of course, as the world has become more prosperous, or at least the Western world has become more prosperous, then the Jews have become more prosperous, and then it is now possible to be a staunch Zionist and live in New York.
That's quite an interesting point about the change in. I asked the change in the Jewish mind, but you talked about the change in the Jewish body.
No, I'm talking about change in the Jewish mind.
Okay.
So they were 7 foot tall. That means they stood upright. They knew what. They didn't have to look over their shoulders to see if the goyim were criticizing them. They didn't have to be afraid of anything. That was the difference in attitude, which he, as an Englishman, grasped immediately. I had not thought about it.